Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the controls of her F-16 Fighting Falcon as she soared through the crystal-clear skies above the Nevada desert. The morning sun painted the landscape below in shades of gold and amber, but Sarah's mind was focused entirely on her mission. She was participating in Red Flag, the most realistic combat training exercise the Air Force conducted, where pilots from around the world came to test their skills against the best. Sarah had earned her place in this exercise through years of dedication and exceptional flying ability. She was one of only 12 female fighter pilots in active duty, and every day she proved that skill mattered more than gender in the cockpit. Her call sign was Phoenix, earned during her first deployment when she had managed to bring her damaged aircraft home after what should have been a fatal hit during a training exercise. Today's scenario was particularly challenging. Sarah was flying as part of the Red Force, representing enemy aircraft that the Blue Force needed to intercept and neutralize. Her job was to penetrate deep into simulated enemy territory, complete a reconnaissance mission, and return to base without being detected or shot down by the defending fighters. As she flew at 25,000 feet, Sarah constantly scanned her instruments and the sky around her. Her radar warning receiver was quiet, indicating no immediate threats, but she knew that could change in seconds. The F-22 Raptors assigned to the Blue Force were somewhere out there, and they were nearly invisible to conventional radar systems. The F-22 was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, with stealth capabilities that made it almost impossible to detect until it was too late. Sarah had studied these aircraft extensively, knowing that if she encountered one during this exercise, her chances of survival would depend entirely on her skill, experience, and maybe a little luck. Suddenly, her radar warning receiver began to chirp softly. Sarah's heart rate increased as she recognized the signature of a fire control radar, attempting to lock onto her aircraft. She immediately began evasive maneuvers, diving toward a canyon system that might provide some cover from the searching radar beams. But Sarah knew the truth that made her stomach clench with fear. If F-22 seconds were hunting her, they had probably already seen her long before she detected them. The Raptors' advanced sensors could track targets from distances that seemed impossible, and their stealth technology meant they could get close enough to fire before their targets even knew they were there. As she flew through the winding canyon, Sarah's radio crackled with the voice of the exercise controller. "All Red Force aircraft, be advised, multiple Blue Force fighters are active in your area. Maintain situational awareness." Sarah pressed her microphone button. "Phoenix copies," she responded, using her call sign to acknowledge the warning. What she didn't know was that 3 F-22 Raptors were already tracking her movement through the canyon system. The lead pilot, Major James Viper Rodriguez, had identified her aircraft on his sensors 5 minutes earlier. His wingmen, Captain Lisa Hawk Thompson and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Storm Davis, had formed a perfect triangle around Sarah's position, ready to simulate the kill shot that would end her participation in the exercise. Major Rodriguez was a veteran pilot with over 2,000 hours in the F-22. He had flown combat missions over Syria and Iraq, and his reputation as one of the Air Force's best pilots was well established. Today's exercise was routine for him, but he took every training mission seriously because he knew that the skills practiced here could mean the difference between life and death in real combat. Viper has contact on Red Force fighter, bearing 180, Angels 20. Rodriguez reported to his wingmen, using military terminology to indicate Sarah's position and altitude. Hawk has contact, Captain Thompson confirmed from the eastern position. Storm has contact, Lieutenant Colonel Davis added from the west. The 3 F-22 seconds began their coordinated attack approach. Their plan was simple and deadly effective. Rodriguez would engage from the south, while his wingmen moved to cut off any escape routes. Sarah's F-16, despite being an excellent aircraft, was outmatched by the superior technology and numerical advantage of the Raptors. Sarah felt the tension building as her electronic warfare systems detected multiple radar signatures beginning to focus on her position. She knew she was in serious trouble. But she also knew that giving up was not an option. She had trained for situations exactly like this, and she was determined to use every skill she possessed to complete her mission. She pulled her aircraft into a steep climb, hoping to gain altitude and possibly escape the radar coverage that was beginning to surround her. Her engines screamed as she pushed them to maximum power, climbing at nearly 45,000 feet per minute. The G-forces pressed her down into her seat, but she maintained consciousness and control through years of training and physical conditioning. Red Force fighter is climbing rapidly, Major Rodriguez observed, watching Sarah's aircraft on his display. Adjusting intercept course. Red Force fighter. Adjusting intercept course. The F-22 seconds matched Sarah's climb effortlessly, their powerful engines and advanced aerodynamics allowing them to maintain their tactical advantage. Rodriguez was impressed by the enemy pilot's aggressive maneuvering, but he knew the outcome of this engagement was already determined. As Sarah reached 35,000 feet, she rolled her aircraft inverted and began a high-speed dive back toward the canyon system. This was a desperate maneuver that required precise timing and exceptional skill to avoid crashing into the canyon walls. She hoped the sudden direction change might confuse the pursuing fighters and give her a few precious seconds to escape. The maneuver was brilliant and dangerous, exactly the kind of flying that had earned Sarah her reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in her squadron. She pulled out of the dive just 500 feet above the canyon floor, her aircraft shuddering under the extreme G-forces, but holding together under her expert control. Major Rodriguez watched this display of flying skill with genuine admiration. "This pilot's good," he commented to his wingmen over the radio. "Really good," but admiration would not change the tactical situation. The three F-22 seconds adjusted their positions to maintain their advantage, and Rodriguez prepared to simulate the missile shot that would end the engagement. His finger moved toward the weapon release button as his targeting system achieved a perfect lock on Sarah's aircraft. Sarah's F-16 screamed through the canyon at maximum speed, her aircraft just barely skimming above the rocky floor, as she desperately tried to break the radar lock that she knew was painting her aircraft. Her hands moved with practiced precision across the controls, implementing every evasive technique she had learned during years of training. The canyon walls blurred past her canopy as she maintained the dangerous low-altitude flight path. Above her, Major Rodriguez and his wingmen maintained their tactical positions with the cold efficiency of experienced hunters. The F-22 seconds moved like ghosts through the sky, their stealth capabilities allowing them to track Sarah's every movement while remaining nearly invisible to her sensors. Rodriguez's targeting system showed a perfect firing solution, and all he needed to do was press the button to simulate the missile launch that would end this exercise. "Viper has tone," Rodriguez announced over the radio, indicating that his weapons system had achieved a lock-on. In a real combat situation, this would be the moment when an actual missile would leave his aircraft and streak toward its target at 3 times the speed of sound. Sarah heard the dreaded sound through her headphones. The sharp, piercing tone that indicated an enemy radar had locked onto her aircraft. In combat, this sound meant death was potentially seconds away. Even in training, it meant her mission was about to end in failure. But she was not ready to give up yet. She pulled her F-16 into an impossibly tight turn, using the canyon walls themselves as cover while she climbed rapidly toward a narrow gap between 2 towering rock formations. The maneuver required split-second timing and absolute precision. A mistake of even a few feet would send her aircraft crashing into the unforgiving stone. Negative tone, Rodriguez reported a moment later, as Sarah's aircraft disappeared behind the rock formation, breaking his radar lock. Target has evaded. Adjusting position. The 3 F-22 seconds spread out to cover the multiple exits from the canyon system. They knew that Sarah would have to emerge, eventually, and when she did, they would be waiting. Rodriguez admired the skill and courage the unknown pilot was displaying, but he also knew that in combat, admiration meant nothing. The mission always came first. Sarah emerged from behind the rocks at nearly 400 knots, her aircraft climbing steeply as she tried to gain altitude and distance from her pursuers. She knew that her only chance was to reach the safety of the mountain range ahead, where the complex terrain might provide enough cover to complete her escape. But the F-22 seconds were already moving to intercept her new course. Captain Thompson approached from the east, while Lieutenant Colonel Davis closed in from the west. Rodriguez positioned himself directly behind Sarah's aircraft, once again achieving a perfect firing position. Multiple contacts closing fast. Sarah muttered to herself as her threat warning systems lit up like a Christmas tree. She could see on her instruments that she was surrounded, with enemy fighters approaching from 3 different directions. Any one of them could end the exercise with a simulated missile shot. Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of continuing to run, she suddenly reversed course and dove directly toward Major Rodriguez's F-22. This head-to-head approach was incredibly dangerous, even in simulation. But it was also completely unexpected. It was the kind of maneuver that could only be attempted by a pilot with exceptional skill and absolute confidence in their aircraft. "Holy shit," Rodriguez said involuntarily as he watched Sarah's F-16 racing directly toward his position. He immediately began evasive maneuvers while trying to maintain his firing solution. The closing speed between the two aircraft was now nearly 1,500 miles per hour, and the margin for error was essentially zero. For a few seconds, it looked like Sarah's desperate gamble might actually work. The head-on approach made it difficult for Rodriguez to maintain his radar lock, and the rapidly changing geometry of the engagement forced all 3 F-22 pilots to adjust their positions. But Rodriguez was not just any pilot. He was one of the best in the Air Force, and he had faced similar situations in actual combat. After a moment of surprise, his training took over, and he calmly adjusted his approach to reacquire his target. "Viper has tone," he announced again, his voice now completely professional and controlled. This time, Sarah knew there was no escape. She was out of altitude, out of airspeed, and out of options. The 3 F-22 seconds had her completely surrounded, and Major Rodriguez's targeting system showed a perfect shot. In a real combat situation, she would have been dead several times over. But the exercise was not over yet. According to the rules, she had to acknowledge the simulated kill before ending her participation. She reached for her radio microphone to call out her aircraft as destroyed when she realized something important. Throughout this entire engagement, she had never identified herself using her call sign. "Blue Force, this is Phoenix," she said into her microphone, using the standard radio protocol to identify herself to the attacking fighters. "I acknowledge your kill. Phoenix is going down." The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. In the lead F-22, Major Rodriguez's finger froze just inches from the weapon release button. The call sign, Phoenix, hit him like a physical blow, bringing back memories he had tried to forget for the past 3 years. "Did she just say Phoenix?" Captain Thompson's voice crackled over the radio, confusion evident in her tone. Rodriguez did not answer immediately. His mind was racing back to a night over Iraq 3 years earlier, when a mission had gone horribly wrong, and only the incredible skill and courage of one pilot had prevented a complete disaster. That pilot's call sign had been Phoenix, and Rodriguez had sworn he would never forget the debt he owed to the woman who had saved his life and the lives of his entire squadron. "Abort! Abort! Abort!" Rodriguez suddenly shouted into his radio, his voice filled with an urgency that confused his wingmen. "All Blue Force fighters, abort engagement immediately." "Viper, what's wrong?" Lieutenant Colonel Davis asked. "We have a perfect shot." The exercise isn't over, but Rodriguez was already turning his F-22 away from the engagement, his hands shaking slightly as the full realization of what had almost happened hit him. The pilot he had been hunting, the enemy fighter he had been about to kill in simulation, was the same person who had risked her own life to save his squadron during one of the darkest moments of his military career. "Phoenix, this is Viper," Rodriguez said into his radio, his voice now filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Sarah, is that really you?" There was a long pause before Sarah responded, her own voice betraying surprise and recognition. "James? James Rodriguez? What the hell are you doing in an F-22? The 2 pilots had not spoken since that night in Iraq, when circumstances and military protocol had separated them before either could properly thank the other. Now, thousands of miles away and 3 years later, they had found each other again under the most unlikely circumstances. "Phoenix, you just gave me the scare of my life," Rodriguez said, genuine emotion creeping into his professional military tone. "I was about to shoot down the pilot who saved my ass in Iraq." The other pilots listening to the radio conversation were confused but beginning to understand that something significant was happening. Captain Thompson and Lieutenant Colonel Davis maintained their positions, but held their fire, waiting for orders from their flight leader. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that the hunter who had been pursuing her through the Nevada desert was not a stranger, but someone she knew and respected. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. The same pilot she had once risked everything to protect was now the one holding her life in his hands. Even if only in simulation. "James, you always were too good at your job," Sarah said with a laugh that carried clearly over the radio. "I thought I was going to have to explain to my commander how I got shot down by ghosts." Rodriguez was already planning their next move. The exercise was officially over for their small group, but there were procedures to follow and reports to write. More importantly, there were 3 years of separation to bridge and a story to tell that would remind everyone involved why they had chosen to serve their country as military pilots. As the 4 aircraft flew in loose formation toward Nellis Air Force Base, Rodriguez found himself thinking back to that night in Iraq that had changed both their lives forever. It was a story that few people knew, and even fewer understood the true significance of what had happened in the skies over Baghdad 3 years earlier. The mission had started as a routine close air support operation. Rodriguez, then a captain flying an F-16, was leading a flight of 4 aircraft tasked with providing cover for ground troops who were conducting a raid on a suspected terrorist compound. Intelligence reports had indicated light resistance and minimal air threats, so the mission planners had not anticipated any significant problems. Sarah had been flying with a different squadron at the time, piloting an A-10 Thunderbolt that was specifically designed for close air support missions. Her aircraft was heavily armored and capable of delivering devastating firepower against ground targets, but it was also much slower and less maneuverable than Rodriguez's F-16. The 2 squadrons had been assigned to work together, with Rodriguez's fighters providing air-to-air protection while Sarah's A-10 handled the ground attack mission. Everything had gone wrong at once. The intelligence reports had been completely incorrect. Instead of a small terrorist cell, the ground troops had stumbled into a major enemy stronghold, defended by sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons and supported by enemy fighters that were supposed to be operating hundreds of miles away. Rodriguez's flight had found themselves outnumbered 3-1 by enemy MiG-29 fighters that had appeared without warning. The enemy pilots were skilled and aggressive, and they had quickly separated Rodriguez from his wingmen and put him in a desperate defensive position. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper Flight," Rodriguez had called over the radio that night, his voice tight with concentration as he tried to evade multiple enemy missiles. "We are engaged by multiple bandits and taking heavy fire. We need immediate assistance." Sarah had been 30 miles away when she heard Rodriguez's distress call. Her A-10 was not designed for air-to-air combat, and military doctrine said she should have maintained her position and continued her assigned mission. But Sarah Mitchell had never been one to follow doctrine when lives were at stake. "Viper Flight, this is Phoenix," she had responded immediately. "I'm coming to assist." Hold on. What followed was 10 minutes of the most intense aerial combat any of them had ever experienced. Sarah flew her heavily loaded A-10 directly into a dogfight where she had no business being, using every trick she knew to disrupt the enemy formation and give Rodriguez's fighters a chance to regroup. The A-10 was not built for dogfighting, but Sarah made it dance through the sky like a fighter jet, using its incredible maneuverability at low speeds to confuse and frustrate the enemy pilots. She could not match their speed or altitude, but she could turn tighter than anything else in the sky, and she used this advantage to repeatedly break up their attack formations. "Phoenix, you need to get out of here," Rodriguez had called during the battle, his voice filled with concern for Sarah's safety. "This is not your fight." "Like hell it isn't," Sarah had responded, her A-10 sliding between 2 enemy fighters and forcing them to break off their attack on Rodriguez's wingmen. "Nobody dies on my watch." The turning point had come when Sarah did something that should have been impossible. As 3 enemy MiGs lined up for a coordinated attack on Rodriguez's damaged fighter, she deliberately flew her A-10 directly into their formation, forcing them to scatter to avoid a collision. The maneuver required perfect timing and absolute fearlessness, and it gave Rodriguez the opening he needed to turn the tables on his attackers. One by one, Rodriguez and his reformed flight had eliminated the enemy fighters but not before Sarah's aircraft had taken severe damage from ground fire and air-to-air missiles. Her left engine was destroyed, her hydraulic system was failing, and she was losing fuel rapidly from multiple holes in her wings and fuselage. "Phoenix is hit hard," she had reported, her voice steady despite the desperate situation she was facing. "I'm not sure I can make it back to base." Rodriguez had immediately formed up on her wing, determined to escort her home after everything she had done to save his squadron. "Phoenix, this is Viper. I'm with you all the way home. We're going to get you back." The flight back to base had taken nearly an hour, with Sarah nursing her badly damaged A-10 through the night sky, while Rodriguez provided navigation assistance and moral support. Twice during the flight, Sarah's damaged aircraft had nearly stalled, and only her exceptional piloting skills had kept them both in the air. When they finally reached their base in Kuwait, Sarah's aircraft was running on fumes and held together by little more than willpower and prayer. She had managed to land safely, but post-flight inspection revealed that her A-10 had taken over 40 hits from various weapons and should have crashed long before she reached safety. The official report of the mission credited Rodriguez's flight with the destruction of 6 enemy aircraft and the successful completion of their assigned mission. Sarah's actions were mentioned only briefly, described as exemplary close air support under difficult conditions. But Rodriguez and every member of his squadron knew the truth. Without Sarah's intervention, they would all have been shot down that night. Her courage and skill had saved 4 lives and prevented a major propaganda victory for enemy forces in Iraq. The next day, Rodriguez had tried to find Sarah to thank her personally, but she had already been transferred to a different base as part of a routine rotation. Military bureaucracy and operational security had prevented him from maintaining contact, and over the years, he had lost track of her entirely. He had often wondered what had happened to the pilot who had risked everything to save strangers, and now he knew. She had continued flying fighters, earned promotion to captain, and somehow ended up in the elite group of pilots qualified for red flag exercises at Nellis Air Force Base. As they approached the runway at Nellis, Rodriguez made a decision that went against standard protocol, but felt absolutely right. "Phoenix. This is Viper. Request permission to form up for a joint landing." Sarah understood immediately what he was asking. A formation landing would be visible to everyone on the base, and it would send a clear message about the respect and mutual regard between the pilots involved. It was an honor typically reserved for special occasions and significant events. "Viper, this is Phoenix. Permission granted. Let's bring these birds home together." The 4 aircraft descended toward the runway in perfect formation, with Rodriguez's F-22 just off Sarah's right wing and his wingmen positioned slightly behind and to the left. Ground crews and other pilots stopped their activities to watch the unusual sight of F-22 Raptors and an F-16 Flying Falcon landing in formation. As they touched down and taxied toward the parking area, Rodriguez felt a sense of completion that he had not experienced in years. The debt he owed to Phoenix had finally been acknowledged, and the circle that had begun 3 years earlier over Iraq was now closed. After shutting down their engines and completing post-flight procedures, the pilots gathered on the tarmac between their aircraft. Rodriguez removed his helmet and approached Sarah, who was walking toward him with a smile that had not changed in 3 years. "I never got the chance to say this properly," Rodriguez said, extending his hand to her. "Thank you for saving my life, Captain Mitchell. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Sarah shook his hand firmly, her own expression serious despite her smile. "You would have done the same thing, Major Rodriguez. That's what we do. We take care of each other." Captain Thompson and Lieutenant Colonel Davis had listened to enough of the radio conversation to understand that their flight leader and the pilot they had been hunting had a significant history together. They stood respectfully nearby, waiting for an introduction that would help them understand the full story. "Phoenix, I want you to meet my wingmen," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward his fellow F-22 pilots. "Captain Lisa Thompson, call sign Hawk, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Davis, call sign Storm. They're 2 of the best pilots in the Air Force." Sarah greeted both pilots warmly, and Rodriguez could see the immediate mutual respect that formed between professional aviators. These were people who understood the demands and dangers of their chosen profession, and they recognized excellence when they encountered it. "So, Phoenix, Captain Thompson said with genuine curiosity. "We heard enough of the radio conversation to know there's a story here. Would you be willing to share it with us?" Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who nodded his encouragement. The story of that night in Iraq was one that deserved to be told, not for glory or recognition, but because it illustrated the values and brotherhood that made military aviation a calling rather than just a job. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, the four pilots sat on the wing of Sarah's F-16 and listened as she and Rodriguez took turns recounting the events of that night 3 years earlier. It was a story of courage, skill, and sacrifice that reminded all of them why they had chosen to serve their country as military pilots. When the story was finished, Lieutenant Colonel Davis stood and saluted Sarah formally. "Captain Mitchell, it has been an honor to meet you. What you did that night was extraordinary." Sarah returned the salute, but her response was characteristically humble. "We all take risks for each other, Colonel. That's what makes us a team." As they walked toward the debriefing room to complete their paperwork and prepare for the next day's training, Rodriguez felt grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together again. The exercise had ended differently than anyone had planned. But sometimes the most important lessons were learned outside of formal training scenarios. The story of Phoenix and Viper would become part of the unofficial history of military aviation, passed down from one generation of pilots to the next as an example of the courage and dedication that defined the profession. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, 2 pilots had found closure for a chapter of their lives that had remained unfinished for far too long.